and what you have seen. But hurry and bring my father down here." Thereupon he flung himself on the neck of his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin wept in his arms. Joseph then kissed all of his brothers, crying over each of them, and only then were his brothers able to talk with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and his courtiers were pleased. So Pharaoh told Joseph, "Say to your brothers, 'This is what you shall do. Load up your animals and go without delay to the land of Canaan. There get your father and your families, and then come back here to me. I will assign you the best land in Egypt, where you will live off the fat of the land. Instruct them further, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your children and your wives, and to transport your father on your way back here. Do not be concerned about all your belongings, for the best in the whole land of Egypt shall be yours." The sons of Israel acted accordingly. Joseph gave them the wagons as Pharaoh had ordered, and he supplied them with provisions for the journey. He also gave to each of them fresh clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of garments. Moreover, what he sent to his father was 10 jackasses loaded with the finest products of Egypt, and 10 jennies loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for their journey. As he sent his brothers on their way, he told them, "Let there be no recrimination on the way." So they left Egypt and made their way to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. When they told him, "Joseph is still alive. In fact, it is he who is ruler of all the land of Egypt," he was dumbfounded. He could not believe them. But when they recounted to him all that Joseph had told them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent for his transport, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. "It is enough," said Israel. "My son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die." In terms of the reconnecting with his brothers, what happens in a sense from the Egyptian standpoint? In other words, what does Pharaoh do?
He lavishes it with everything.
Yeah, he says, "We've loved Joseph, go get the rest of your family." Okay, and they send him tons of wealth and tons of everything they could need. Okay, so this is what comes back to Jacob, to Israel, if you will. So chapter 46, yes.
Okay, so as Joseph is revealing himself to his brothers, he says that he is father to Pharaoh.
I wondered if you were going to catch that.
Where does that come from? Because he was second in command.
He was basically, he's basically saying to his family when no one else is around, "Look, I run this place."
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically
what he's doing.
Yes. I mean, he's basically saying, Pharaoh doesn't run this country. I run this country. I'm telling you, I can do whatever I want at this point. So it's just, it does really push the envelope in terms of his considering his position. He basically feels he's the Pharaoh, even more so than Pharaoh at this point, because he's the one that's calling all the shots throughout the family, etc. But yeah, it's an interesting term that is used there. I'm the father of Pharaoh, even, so to speak. Okay? Yes, thanks for catching that. Chapter 46. We're probably not going to go through all this because a lot of it is the family and it gets very heavy. But Israel set out with all that was his. When he arrived at Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. There God, speaking to Israel in a vision by night, called, "Jacob, Jacob." "Here I am," he answered. Then he said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you a great nation. Not only will I go down to Egypt with you, I will also bring you back here, after Joseph has closed your eyes." So Jacob departed from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel put their father and their wives and children on the wagons that Pharaoh had sent for his transport. They took with them their livestock and all the possessions they had acquired in the land of Canaan. Thus Jacob and all his descendants migrated to Egypt. His sons and his grandsons, his daughters and his granddaughters, all of his descendants, he took with him to Egypt. And then verse 8 is where I'll leave it. These are the names of the Israelites, Jacob and his descendants, who migrated to Egypt. And so you are going to have, son by son, tribe by tribe, if you will, the descendants of all of the people that go. Okay? So jumping over, we're still in chapter 46. Jump over to verse 33. Actually, 31. So it gets through all of the map, and then we'll go to let's go back to verse 26, actually. So chapter 46, where we were, verse 26. Jacob's people who migrated to Egypt, his direct descendants, not counting the wives of Jacob's sons, numbered 66 persons in all. Together with Joseph's sons who were born to him in Egypt, 2 persons. All the people comprising Jacob's family who had come to Egypt amounted to 70 persons in all. Israel had sent Judah ahead to Joseph so that he might meet him in Goshen. On his arrival in the region of Goshen, Joseph hitched the horse to his chariot and rode to meet his father Israel in Goshen. As soon as he saw him, he flung himself on his neck and wept a long time in his arms. And Israel said to Joseph, "At last I can die now, that I have seen for myself that Joseph is still alive." Verse 31. Joseph then said to his brothers in his father's household, "I will go and inform Pharaoh, telling him, 'My brothers and my father's household, whose home is in the land of Canaan, have come to me. The men are shepherds, having long been keepers of livestock, and they have brought with them their flocks and herds, as well as everything else they own. So when Pharaoh summons you and asks what your occupation is, you must answer, 'We, your servants, like our ancestors, have been keepers of livestock from the beginning until now, in order that you may stay in the region of Goshen, since all shepherds are abhorrent to the Egyptians.'"
Oh. That doesn't sound good.
Well, unfortunately, we have the gift of history, and we know that this whole story goes upended eventually, right? So we have to, that kind of pokes at your mind while this is happening. Chapter 47. Joseph went and told Pharaoh, "My father and my brothers have come here from the land of Canaan with their flocks and herds and everything else they own, and they are now in the region of Goshen." He then presented to Pharaoh 5 of his brothers, whom he had selected from their full number. When Pharaoh asked them what their occupation was, they answered, "We, your servants, like our ancestors, are shepherds. We have come," they continued, "in order to stay in this country, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks in the land of Canaan. So severe has the famine been there. Please, therefore, let your servants settle in the land of Goshen." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "They may settle in the region of Goshen, and if you know any of them to be qualified, you may put them in charge of my own livestock." Thus, when Jacob and his sons came to Joseph in Egypt, and the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, heard about it, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Now that your father and brothers have come to you, the land of Egypt is at your disposal. Settle your father and brothers in the pick of the land." Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. After Jacob had paid his respects to Pharaoh, Pharaoh asked him, "How many years have you lived?" Jacob replied, "The years I have lived as a wayfarer amount to 130. Few and hard have been these years of my life, and they do not compare with the years that my ancestors lived as wayfarers." Then Jacob bade Pharaoh farewell and withdrew from his presence. As Pharaoh had ordered, Joseph settled his father and brothers and gave them holdings in Egypt on the pick of the land in the region of Ramses. And Joseph sustained his father and brother and his father's whole household, down to the youngest, with food. And then we're going to have a couple of different paragraphs. They're going to talk about how Joseph continues to rule the land of Egypt during this time. Okay? It talks about land policy that he puts into place. There's a special blessing. If we go to verse 27. Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt in the region of Goshen. There they acquired property, were fertile, and increased greatly. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. The span of his life came to 147 years. When the time approached for Israel to die, he called to his son Joseph and said to him, "If you really wish to please me, put your hand under my thigh as a sign of your constant loyalty to me. Do not let me be buried in Egypt. When I lie down with my ancestors, have me taken out of Egypt and buried in their burial place." "I will do as you say," Joseph replied. But his father demanded, "Swear it to me." So Joseph swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed. Sometime afterwards, Joseph was informed, "Your father is failing." So he took along with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to you," he rallied his strength and sat up in bed. Jacob then said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessing me, he said, 'I will make you fertile and numerous and raise you into an assembly of tribes, and I will give this land to your descendants after you as a permanent possession. Your two sons, therefore, who were born to you in the land of Egypt there before I joined you there, shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as much as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Progeny born to you after them shall remain yours, but their heritage shall be recorded in the names of their two brothers. I do this because when I was returning from Padan, your mother Rachel died, to my sorrow, during the journey in Canaan, while we were still a short distance from Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem." When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he asked, "Who are these?" "These are my sons," Joseph answered his father, "whom God has given me here." "Bring them to me," said his father, "that I may bless them." Now Israel's eyes were dim from age, and he could not see well. When Joseph brought his sons close to him, he kissed and embraced them. Then Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your descendants as well." Joseph removed them from his father's knees and bowed down before him with his face to the ground. Then Joseph took the two, Ephraim with his right hand to Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand to Israel's right, and led them to him. But Israel, crossing his hands, put out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, although he was the younger, and his left hand then on the head of Manasseh, although he was the firstborn. Then he blessed them with these words, "May the God in whose ways my father Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd from birth to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, bless these boys, that in them my name may be recalled, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and they may become teeming multitudes upon the earth." When Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, this seemed wrong to him. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's, saying, "That is not right, father. The other one is the firstborn. Lay your right hand on his head." But his father resisted. "I know it, son," he said. "I know. That one too shall become a tribe, and he too shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall surpass him, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. So when he blessed them that day, by you shall the people of Israel pronounce blessings. May they say, God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. He placed Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will restore you to the land of your fathers. As for me, I give to you as to one above his brothers, Shechem, which I captured from the Amorites with my sword and bow. What does that little blessing story recall?
Esau.
In other words, Jacob, who were the brothers, Jacob and Esau, and what happens in terms of their standing in the story and in the family and in history. Jacob stole the blessing. Remember, there was some shenanigans there, and the younger one gets the blessing that the older one should have had. The next generation now, with Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, he takes them to their grandfather for a final blessing, because he's getting old and ready to die, and Jacob intentionally switches the blessing. It's a little bit of a reflection of what had gone on in the generation before. So Ephraim will receive blessing. Manasseh will be okay too. but Ephraim will be the one that is blessed.
But Jacob didn't really steal it, because his brother gave it to him.
The birthright.
Oh, okay.
That's different than the blessing.
Yes, there was the birthright and the blessing. They're kept separate in the story, so to speak. Okay? Chapter 49, we'll talk about the family. We're not going to go that in great detail. It's going to go son by son, what their heritage will be all about. Feel free to read through that if you would like. But we'll go to verse 28 then. Verse 28 of chapter 49. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said about them as he bade them farewell and gave to each of them an appropriate message. Then he gave them this charge: Since I'm about to be taken to my kindred, bury me with my fathers in the cave that lies in the field of Ephraim the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah, facing on Mamre in the land of Canaan, the field that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite for a burial ground. There Abraham and his wife Sarah are buried, and so are Isaac and his wife Rebekah, and there too I buried Leah, the field and the cave in it that have been purchased from the Hittites. When Jacob had finished giving these instructions to his sons, he drew his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was taken to his kindred. Kind of the perfect death, right?
Yeah.
He gives all the last farewell blessings, all the last farewell instructions, says, this is where you are to bury me. And I love that image. He drew his feet into the bed and it's gone. Okay? Chapter 50. Joseph threw himself on his father's face and wept over him as he kissed him. Then he ordered the physicians in his service to embalm his father. When they embalmed Israel, they spent 40 days at it, for that is the full period of embalming. And the Egyptians mourned him for 70 days. When that period of mourning was over, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's courtiers. Please do me this favor, he said, and convey to Pharaoh this request of mine. Since my father at the point of death made me promise an oath to bury him in the tomb that he had prepared for himself in the land of Canaan, may I go up there to bury my father and then come back? Pharaoh replied, go and bury your father, as he made you promise on oath. So Joseph left to bury his father, and with him went all of Pharaoh's officials who were senior members of the court, and all the other dignitaries of Egypt, as well as Joseph's whole household, his brothers and his father's household. Only their children and their flocks and herds were left in the region of Goshen. Chariots too and charioteers went up with him. It was a very large retinue. Bless you. When they arrived at Goren HaAtad, which is beyond the Jordan, they held there a very great and solemn memorial service. And Joseph observed 7 days of mourning for his father. When the Canaanites who inhabited the land saw the mourning at Goren HaAtad, they said, this is a solemn funeral the Egyptians are having. That is why the place was named Abel Mizraim, that is beyond the Jordan. Thus Jacob's sons did for him as he had instructed them. They carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave in the field of Machpelah facing on Mamre, the field that Abraham had bought for a burial ground from Ephron the Hittite. After Joseph had buried his father, he returned to Egypt. By the way, I should pause. You get this rather amazing vision of Jacob's funeral. First of all, he's embalmed like an Egyptian mummy, and then they take his body back to the land of Canaan, and you have this whole group of Egyptians that go back. So it's the Hebrew people accompanied by all these Egyptians. Why? Why? Because that's how important Joseph is to them. Okay? Don't miss that point. It's a very bizarre situation, actually, that you have all these foreigners that are part of this huge funeral, this huge send-off, if you will. And then everybody heads back. Okay? So Verse 14, after Joseph had buried his father, he returned to Egypt together with his brothers and all who had gone up with him for the burial of his father. Verse 15, now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became fearful and thought, suppose Joseph has been nursing a grudge against us and now plans to pay us back in full for all the wrong we did him. So they approached Joseph and said, before your father died, he gave us these instructions. You shall say to Joseph, Jacob begs you to forgive the criminal wrongdoing of your brothers who treated you so cruelly. Please therefore forgive the crime that we, the servants of your father's God, committed. When they spoke these words to him, Joseph broke into tears. Then his brothers proceeded to fling themselves down before him and said, let us be your slaves. But Joseph replied to them, have no fear. Can I take the place of God? Even though you meant harm to me, God meant it for good, to achieve his present end, the survival of many people. Therefore have no fear. I will provide for you and for your children. By thus speaking kindly to them, he reassured them. Joseph remained in Egypt together with his father's family. He lived 110 years. He saw Ephraim's children to the third generation, and the children of Manasseh's son Machir were also born on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die. God will surely take care of you and lead you out of this land to the land he promised an oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then putting the sons of Israel under oath, he continued, when God thus takes care of you, you must bring my bones up with you from this place. Joseph died at the age of 110. He was embalmed and laid to rest in a coffin in Egypt.
He didn't go back.
And that is how Exodus ends.
He dies before his older brothers.
At least some of them. It doesn't say anything about the deaths of any of the others. Okay? We've actually already gone here, but just to kind of connect the dots, now that we've finished the story of Jacob and Joseph and his brothers and all of that, if you start into Exodus, where we started, these are the names of the sons of Israel, right? It goes through all the tribes. And then look at verse 8. Then a new king who knew nothing of Joseph came to power in Egypt. That's how it strings the stories together. Okay? Based upon the text and based upon our best estimates, we anticipate from the time Joseph brought Israel's family, Jacob's family, to Egypt, and by the time the new Pharaoh shows up on the scene is probably about 10 generations. In other words, about 400 years. So when they say a new king who knew nothing of Joseph came to power, yeah, that would do it. Okay? And it doesn't even mean he doesn't know the story of it, but at that point, 300, 400 years later, I don't care, I'm going to do what I need to do. Okay? We got a little tiny inkling of this in the story of Joseph. Based upon the latter part of the story, when things start getting explained and so forth, out of Joseph's mouth, he says what? My own problem, my own being sold into slavery, was not an act by my brothers being devious. It was what? It was an act of God. So that now, because the famine has hit, people from all over the known world, and especially our family, would be part of this being saved. Okay?
Was that a miracle that they had enough food? How would you ever?
Well, he had stored up a lot for 7 years, but it is a wonder that you can have enough to survive another 7 years.
Plus everybody else.
Of course, it says they had so much they couldn't even measure it anymore. They just kept storing it and storing it and storing it. Okay? From a standpoint of sheer science, technology, and agriculture, what is interesting about Egypt in the midst of this? It's a very dry climate. So once you have grain dry, it's pretty dry. As long as you keep it safe from mice and things like that, it will keep a long time. So the conditions are right for saving grain and other foods. The second thing is, science would say, part of the reason why Egypt probably fared better than all the surrounding regions is why? They still have the Nile. Okay, when you look at the ancient world from the biblical perspective and even the non-biblical perspective, Egypt is always on its own, so to speak, in a good way, because they have the Nile, they have the Nile, they have the Nile. And that changes everything in terms of the water that is available, irrigation, crops, etc., etc. Okay? So Egypt is a unique country in the ancient world, and it's mainly because of the waters of the Nile, which of course, and we're not going to go back through Exodus, obviously, but in the story of Exodus, the Nile plays a very important part, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it always does in the ancient history of Israel. It always plays an important part. When everybody else around them is in rough shape, we got the Nile. We're going to be just fine. So in Joseph saying, it wasn't so much the deviousness of my brothers that caused me to suffer, but it was God's will. What is part of this whole story that we walk away from now? Where's Jacob's family? What will happen to them while they're in Egypt? What will eventually happen to them? They'll become slaves, but what's the rest of the story? God will again use a difficult situation to bring them out of that to what Jewish people still celebrate. The Passover, the deliverance of God, the deliverance of the people by God to a greater purpose. You'll notice we even caught it near the end. When Jacob is saying his final words, he says, everybody will go back to the land. God will take us to that land that's been promised. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has promised this. Okay, so there's always that looking to, things might be bad, but we have God that has promised us this. Okay? We'll meet not in 2 weeks like we normally do, but next week is our last time. We'll have fun with the video. We'll probably make popcorn. Feel free to bring any other treats or anything else you want, because we're finishing our first year of Bible study. Woohoo! That's something to celebrate. Okay? So we've been through Exodus, and we've been through Exodus and the other books. We've gone back and we've connected the dots from Genesis. So with where we have been now, we have done the entire Torah. We've done the first 5 books, the Pentateuch. Okay, so that in the fall then, that's where we'll pick up. We'll pick up with them. Remember, they were just coming into the land. They were just establishing themselves as a nation. That's where we'll pick up the story. So when we come back in September, we're going to get very heavily into the whole establishment of Saul as king, the succession of David, David being the eternal king, as in house of David, line of David, royal family of David, etc., etc., etc. And that will set the tone for lots of stuff that will happen between the establishment of the kingdom and the time of Christ. But it will always go back to David, to David, to David, to David. That will be the theme throughout the rest of the Old Testament, really. There are lots of tales, there are lots of stories, there are lots of legends, there are lots of characters that are going to be part of it, but it will continually go back to David, David, David. Because once David is established as the king and the beloved royal family, that never changes. And that has not changed. To Christians, because who comes from the house of David? Christ. and even to the Jewish person who is not Christian, but still holds on to the line of David as being the blessed of the Lord, so to speak. Okay?
So where will we start out in September?
Where will we start out in September, she asks. I haven't gotten there yet. I gotta go back and review.
Okay,